Okay, hi everybody, welcome. I just realized I have no idea what the title of our panel is. Building Pathways to Leadership in Male-Dominated Occupations. That's the title of our panel. So welcome everybody, we're thrilled to have you. My name is Emily Twarog. I'm a professor in the School of Labor and Employment Relations and the director of the Regina Polk Women's Labor Leadership Conference, and I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel with a very esteemed group of leaders in their fields. So their bios, and they're going to talk a little bit about themselves, so I'm not going to go into details doing a bio for each of them, and then obviously their names and contact information are all in your app, so I highly recommend you use that. The topic today, I mean, we really want to focus today's discussion not so much on the fact that we know that women are underrepresented in STEM and the building trades. That's not really what we want to focus on. We'd actually much rather focus on a discussion around solutions and strategies, because I feel like we've spent the morning kind of talking about inequities, and now it's time to spend a little bit of time. We have an hour talking about what solutions look like and what strategies look like. And we also will have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So if you have any questions that you want to ask, we have reserved the last 15 minutes for Q&A, so keep that in mind as well. So I'm going to just turn it right over to our speakers, and we're just going to go straight down the row, and starts with Neena, to tell us a little bit about how you got into the field that you're in. So just kind of give us your name and what you do and how it is that you got into this field.
Sure. Hi, I'm Neena Hemmady. I work for ComEd, the electric service provider here in this area. And I'm very proud, as I was talking to the Chicago Women in Trades, that we have a union that's been over 100 years. I'm trying to think of how many years, maybe 110 years old, of electrical workers that we want more and more women to be part of. But I will tell you, as a day-to-day job, I'm in charge of the environmental function at ComEd. I also am in charge of all of the construction of all of our large grid projects. I also interconnect all the solar. So if you are building a renewable, whether it's on your house or a utility scale, I'm the person who's making sure it gets connected to the grid. So just in terms of like a personal story of how I got here, I will tell you that when I was growing up, I just knew as a teenager, I knew it, that I wanted to be a marine biologist. I just knew it like deep in my bones. And I think it was because like my people come from water. I don't know. It's like something. I just have always been connected to water. And when I made this realization and I come down and I'm having breakfast and my dad is at the table. And you know, my dad is an immigrant from India. He was born on a dirt floor. He like scraped his way to come to this country. So he really had a different idea of what life and stability meant than I did. But I made my grand announcement to him saying, Dad, I know exactly what I want to do. I want to be a marine biologist. And I like said it, and his face made my, you know, like my face fell, because he basically said in no uncertain terms, hell no, you know. And he for him it was scary to hear that, because it didn't sound like something that was stable. It didn't sound like something that I would be able to, you know, have stable employment with. He was just so worried about me being stable. And so here's the thing. I compromised with him, and I said, basically his whole thing is, if you didn't become an engineer, there was no other path, like engineer or bust kind of a deal, because that's what he knew. So I made my first compromise, and I said, fine, I will become an environmental engineer, and I will like find a way to still live with my values. Compromise is okay, but know who you are, kind of a thing. And I knew who I was. And so I became an environmental engineer, and I really targeted my career on how do I prevent pollution, how do I make things as green and clean and as equitable as possible, how do we make things good for not only women but all people. You know, how do we have an equitable and just society and have that represented in our workplaces? That's what I've been working on for the last 27 years. So I'll turn it to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Megan Johnson. I'm an astronomer from the National Science Foundation, and I study galaxies, both small and very large, and they're supermassive black holes in the hearts of the galaxies that form stars. And I've been using that data over the last 7.5 years or so to support the United States Naval Observatory's mission in position navigation and timing. So your GPS that you have on your phone actually uses data from the United States Naval Observatory, and the time on your phone actually comes from the observatory. And my job while I was at the Naval Observatory was to study these, what are called quasars, these black holes, and measure their positions on the sky to very, very high accuracy. And those sources are actually used for navigation. So how your GPS actually tells you where to go, that is all tied to these supermassive black holes and galaxies that are very, very far away. And I left that position just a few months ago for an opportunity to work at the National Science Foundation, where I am a program officer supporting infrastructure facilities. So the astronomical facilities that are used to actually make those observations is now part of my job to ensure that they get proper funding and that the U.S. government is getting the most out of those facilities to support things like GPS navigation. So I am grateful that I have chosen a career that makes me feel like I never have to work a day in my life because I love it so much. But I also really appreciate the fact that I get to use my skills for something very useful and tangible, because I really love that service, that public service aspect of my work. That's very important to me. So I got started in this field. Actually, in undergrad, I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I got my bachelor's degree in statistics and probability with a minor in finance, as I thought I wanted to be an actuary working in insurance. But when I graduated and started working in an insurance company, I realized watching paint dry would be more interesting. So I promptly quit that job and moved to Atlanta, Georgia, where I waited tables for a number of years. And through a network of really close friends that I met there, really discovered that my passions for mathematics really translated more into being a professor, an academic, and that teaching at a collegiate level was something that I thought I would find amazingly exciting. But doing math equations every day would get dry and boring, so I thought astronomy is the application of math. So I got into graduate school at Georgia State University, and when I was ready for my PhD dissertation project, I moved to Flagstaff, Arizona, where I did a pre-doctoral program with an astronomer at Lowell Observatory. Her name is Dr. Deidre Hunter. She was the only astronomer at Lowell that studied galaxies, which is what I really, really gravitated towards. And Deidre was the very first postdoctoral student of Dr. Vera Rubin. And Dr. Rubin now has a telescope named after her at the National Science Foundation. She obtained her PhD in 1959. She was definitely one of only 2 or 3 women in the field. She had to get special permission. She came observing with Deidre and I when I was a grad student at Kitt Peak Observatory, and she was telling me this story about how she would have to ask special permission to go observing at Mount Palomar Observatory in California because they did not have a women's bathroom. And that in the middle of the night during her observing run, she would have to leave the telescope, get in a car, and drive to a little restaurant that was open 24 hours to use the bathroom and then come back. So there's a picture of Vera, Deidre, and myself as these 3 generations of women astronomers that have come from this, pioneering woman in her field. And so I'm very grateful and lucky that I had that experience. And here I am.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. My name is Leah Rambo. I'll start with where I am currently. I'm the president of an organization called Nontraditional Employment for Women. It's located in New York City, and I've been with them just over 6 months. And the sole purpose of this program, it's a pre-apprenticeship program that helps women to get into the building trade unions, advanced manufacturing, green economy, so all those type of trades, constructions. And we've also kind of expanded to things in New York. We have Con Edison, not ComEd, but Con Edison. Could be the firefighters, it might be the Port Authority, because all of those transit systems also have their own independent maintenance and construction programs. So that's where I'm at now. But if you really ask me about myself, I'll always say that I'm a sheet metal worker by trade. I became a sheet metal worker in 1988 and did my apprenticeship with the union in New York City and retired from there in 2003 with a pension, which is probably the most important part of that story. And I came to this job via the Women's Bureau. I see some of my former colleagues there. I did serve for a little while as the Deputy Director at the U.S. Department of Labor, the Women's Bureau. But in terms of my trajectory, I was thinking about the both of you. Like, I was the kid on our trips down south to see my grandparents that would be laying in the back window. You could do that long ago. And I would just lay on the back window with a pillow and a blanket and just watch the stars the whole way down. I was also the kid very drawn to water, so much so that I almost drowned 3 times. So I would always hop back in. One time even while I was getting swimming lessons, but I did eventually become a diver. So, and you know, when as a kid, what did I want to do? I wanted to be a veterinarian. I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to be an electrician. I wanted to be a flight attendant because I love to travel. I think those were like my main occupations. I was trying to figure out how to fit them all together, but I remember at 10, I got my first tool set. And my parents, in terms of how I got started, my dad worked for correction. He was a warden at one of the jails in New York City. And what I remembered growing up was get a good union job and get a skill. So it was never really pushed towards college necessarily, but I did go to an engineering high school, and that's when I thought I wanted to be an electrical engineer. But after doing an internship as an electrician's helper, I was like, okay, forget that. I'm going to be an electrician. And the organization that I'm working with right now, I went there right after high school, and it's like, how do I become an electrician? And they were like, come back when you're 21. And as I was walking out the door, there was a woman also by the name of Leah Rivera, who said, you should try sheet metal. And probably many of you don't know what it is. I did not either, but sheet metal workers do the design, fabrication, installation of the HVAC system. The mechanical engineer designs the system, and we make sure it fits into the space. So these vents along the wall, those are sheet metal. Sheet metal workers do that. That's where the air comes out. Statue of Liberty, that's sheet metal. So many of the roofs that you see green in this city, in New York City, architectural sheet metal, plus a host of other things. I won't go into all the sheet metal. That's another panel. But I will say that it has been an incredibly exciting trade. Was able to kind of move through the ranks in that trade and then go into leadership. But that's kind of what brings me here. And throughout my journey, it's always been the same goal for me. It's equity, it's inclusion. It's just fair working conditions, everyone to have the same opportunity. For women to have the ability to have a really good job that is able to take care of themselves, take care of their families, get a pension, and survive. Not just survive, really thrive, right? That's all. Economic security for women. So that's been my thread through every job that I've gone to, and it's what brings me here today.
Thank you so much. When we were preparing for this talk, it seems like 3 disparate stories, but they're not. They're all sort of woven together. And one of the key themes, right, is that these are all industries in which women are very, very much underrepresented. But there are also industries that are very well-paying industries, that are fields that, we spent a lot of time this morning talking about inequity, wage inequity, aging and retirement and inability for many women to retire, the racial aspect of inequity and how women of color are even more impacted by wage inequity. And I think one of the themes that is really important that needs to be highlighted is, and you were just talking about this, Leah, is the importance of unions. And especially in the building trades, which is, overwhelmingly union. You're not just talking about wages that are higher, but you're also talking about pensions, right? Something that many people don't have anymore. And if you're in the public sector as well, even if you're non-union, you are often, lucky enough now to still have a pension, right? And that's something that enables women, right, to be able to retire, as well as the benefit of a collective bargaining agreement, right? When we talk about wage inequity, collective bargaining agreements protect against wage inequity. Now, it's not to say that everything's perfect. There are still ways in which there is inequality in terms of access to training and opportunities to move forward within your job. But having some kind of contract like a collective bargaining agreement really does limit the ability for that inequity to persist. And so just thinking about these industries that you come out of and the choices that you've made to get into these fields, how do we, and I'll just open this up to the three of you, whoever wants to chime in first can, but how do we build a pipeline so that we have more women in these fields? And maybe I'll start with you, Leah, because you are doing the pre-apprenticeship work and you went through an apprenticeship program. But how do we, I teach women, I teach folks in the building trades. I go into unions, I teach labor history, and I'm always just, I've been doing it for 13 years now, and we still continue to have so few women in those rooms, right? So how do we get more women into these fields?
I'd say early. The earlier the exposure, the better. And I have, my sister has 5 children. All 5 of them became sheet metal workers. 4 of them are girls. And when I tell you I talk into her belly, like that is a literal thing I do. And my sister's like, could you get away from me? Get away from me. She said it for every pregnancy. For every pregnancy, I talked about sheet metal. I got my sheet metal workers. I'm not saying that's the only way, but I'm saying that you cannot expose girls and young women early enough.
Right.
Because what happens is we have a blinders on us, and we are systematically steered to these jobs that are the girl jobs. And they are lower paying jobs. And what we're doing is we're shutting down our young women. We're shutting down their growth, their room to have these opportunities. And so many of the organizations I work with, even say Tools and Tiaras, start 6 years old. I had my first tool set at 10. I remember one of my little nieces, she's a grown woman with 3 kids of her own now, but, she was the one, she had these little skinny arms and with the drill in her hand, and I'm helping her to hold it, and she's trying to figure it out for every home project I had. So that's the one thing I would say. You want to start early exposure and giving girls the opportunity. And then the next thing I would say is really building up the young women to have confidence. My parents put in my head, there was simply that I could do whatever I wanted to do. They put in my head that this was a viable option, and you're smart, and you could do this. Why wouldn't you be able to? And having that background and that confidence helped me to withstand all of the challenges and the bruises and the beat-ups that I was going to get along the way as I was moving up through the ranks. So I would say you want to start extremely early, and you want to help bring up and teach women to be confident and give them real support, separate support, away from the guys where they don't have to feel the pressure, where they don't have to feel like they have to impress someone, to give them the opportunities to play around with tools, to mess up if they want to really explore it.
How about you, Sarah?
So I think one of the most impactful things I did when I was a grad student at Lowell Observatory, my advisor, Deidre Hunter, started a Lowell Observatory Navajo Hopi astronomy outreach program, and it was actually funded by the National Science Foundation. And what this program did was bring astronomy activities out to underserved schools in the Navajo and Hopi reservations. And Deidre would work one-on-one with a teacher every school year And then eventually I got my own teacher. I was so excited, where you could try and build confidence in the teacher to teach science and astronomy specifically to kids between 5th and 8th grades. And I participated in this program for the 3 years that I was in Flagstaff. And these kids, you know, some of the schools that we would visit were so underserved. Like they didn't have stall doors on the girls' bathrooms in middle school. These were some of the, you know, I'd never seen conditions quite like that. And to talk about astronomy, which in some Navajo and Hopi cultures is, you know, in some ways can be taboo, there was a cultural sensitivity that I learned and grew to appreciate and incorporate into the storytelling of the stars. It's very ingrained in our culture since humans first existed. So it was very enriching, both, I think, for myself and also hopefully for some of these schools that really didn't have access to some of the basic fundamental things. And Deidre once asked a few teachers years later, you know, if any of the kids had actually gone on to become astronomers. And sure enough, several of these students who had, you know, been in the classroom and, you know, 5th grade, it just, you know, was a hook that they just, you know, became very passionate about and ended up pursuing graduate level courses and work and in astronomy. So I think you can make a difference, like Leah was saying, with getting out there to, you know, the environments where these communities, you know, maybe don't have as many opportunities as others, and share your passions, share your what it is that you love to do, and it can have a really dramatic impact, I think. We fished in all of the pools already that, you know, like all of the, you know, best minds in the white male community have given all of the, you know, like that pool has been fished in already. We've got to, you know, look at the other, you know, areas in our society where we can really advance, and it'll help everybody. It'll advance our field, it'll advance our society, our culture, and I think outreach can't be underestimated.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess the answer that first comes to mind, I have 3 words: intention, intention, and intention. Those are my 3 words, because it's intentional why we have the system that we have today, right? It's policies, it's history, it's cultural barriers, it's whatever it might be. All of those intentional things have led to what we have today. So if you want to undo it, intention, intention, intention. I had a great conversation with you all for like 3 minutes before coming up here, which is, hey, maybe the IBAW, how can I connect the IBAW leads? Because I will just say, there are still people running the trades. There is some assumptions about who could do this work and who this work is meant for. And we have to break that kind of paradigm open and say this work can be for everybody. That's part 1. I think having a plan for every level, so it's, you know, craft and union related jobs are part of the story. Another part of the story is entry level folks. Another part of the story is, you know, all different levels. So like as an executive in the company that I work for, it's really important to me that I corral my fellow executives and say, okay, what are we doing to make sure that if you're an up and coming person in the organization and you're a manager, how do I intentionally set up time with you and set up a meeting, set up a lunch, do something where you know that there's another woman in the organization who's like, that sees you, recognizes you, wants you to be successful, wants to lift you up. Because if we're not intentional about the lifting up, our culture and society doesn't automatically make people feel lifted up. So you have to be intentional to counteract it. So these are things we could do. There's nothing stopping us from connecting to other people. There's nothing stopping us from doing that in an organized way at all levels. So I will say that's part of it. The other part of it is when, again, as an executive, one of the things that we do is we do performance reviews in the company. And I've been pretty adamant that we have to address our unconscious biases before having talks about performance or about people's potential, that all of that has to be done with intention. And name the biases, name the kinds of things that could be coming up so that when you're entering those rooms and those conversations, people have at least been told, hey, these are things to be watching out for. Those are just a couple practical things that I've attempted in my career, but.
Yeah, no, I think that they're all connected, right? How do we lift up the next generation? But it's not just lifting up the next generation into the system as it currently exists, right? Because we all know that the system as it currently exists, the institutions that currently exist are biased, right? And they are established based on a set of assumptions about what work looks like, what a work day looks like, right? What work-life balance looks like. And that, I think, is where, in terms of it's not just about getting women into these positions, right? But it's also about retention, right? About being able to retain women, allowing them to thrive in these positions. And I think that's what I want to kind of move on to next is how do we get to a place where, all right, we've succeeded in recruiting, right? But what happens when you get there? I asked my undergrads, if you have a business where the entire, executive set of offices is filled with women and people of color, does that make it a sort of intersectional feminist organization? And half of them say yes, and the other half say no. And then the answer is no, because you need to be intentional about how you break down these biases, right? We can fill a room or we can fill a job with what looks like a diverse set of workers, but if we're not addressing, like you were saying, Neena, the biases that are there, the way in which we evaluate people, the opportunities that are open up to people, and also the restrictions, right? So thinking about issues like childcare, leave, elder care, right? We're often in that bind where we not only maybe have childcare, but we have elder care responsibilities, also the isolation of being kind of the only one in your field for a while. So what are some of the solutions that you've seen or experienced, perhaps in your own work or you've witnessed in other organizations to kind of address these issues of the challenges that women face? I don't know, we'll start with you, Neena, and work your way back. Or
Yeah, I mean, the way that solutions come up, in my opinion, is people who are directly affected have to be part of the conversation, and you can't just come up with the solution and say, oh, here, I've presented this perfect solution for you. Life just doesn't work that way. People who have, so you mentioned, working parents or elder care, or whatever there could be a transportation issue, there could be, generational trauma in your family, and you have to deal with so many other things that are hidden. There's so many possible combinations that a person has to work through. I think the number one way to manage it is to actually have people who are directly affected be part of the solution making and part of the conversation. And that's where the connection and the intention that I was talking about just a couple seconds ago, to me, that's where it all comes together, is if you're intentional about connecting and really listening and really learning what people are facing. The next step is then, what are the barriers that we're intentionally creating? So for me, in the company that I work for, what are we doing to make it harder for people? What requirements are we putting out there that are intentionally creating walls and barriers? And are we brave enough to name it? Are we brave enough to say, hey, we're willing to knock this down? Part of that takes some sponsorship, and part of that takes years of training folks that this is part of our jobs, is doing that. But to me, it's ultimately about connection, listening, and people directly impacted being part of it. But
Yeah, that's I love that. So my experiences, I actually think for me the most eye-opening time was actually during the pandemic when we were at home full time. Both, the kids are at home, my husband's at home, and I'm trying to work. And although there was some semblance of a typical work day, it was far more dynamic than this 9 to 5, 1950s style prescription that we've all been, trying to adhere to ever since it was adopted. But I really think that the pandemic and during COVID, a whole new way of looking at how work is done blew wide open. And I think that right now in this post-pandemic world, I worry that we're not maximizing on some of the opportunities that the pandemic may have presented itself. That there's this big push to still go back to this 9 to 5, as a working mom, rushing home to pick your kid up from daycare by 5:30. God forbid it's 5:45 and you're charged $200 for being late. That if I could leave my job at 2 o'clock in the afternoon so I can be home when my daughter's done with school and cook dinner and then, pick up my research at 9 o'clock at night after they've all gone to bed. And sometimes those are the best hours that I have to where my brain is, free to think and calm and clear. And so for me, like if I were part of your conversation, I would ask that I be allowed, a flexible work schedule that goes beyond, some of these hybrid situations that we're still, grappling with today. But really seeing if we can rethink metrics that define what a quality work is. What does it mean to be a productive worker? What does it mean to be able to do your job? Does it mean 40 hours a week, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday? Does it mean that, Saturday afternoon, I've got little downtime, I can work on a paper? I think, I can establish my roles and responsibilities. I can accomplish my job, in a way that better suits my life and still be productive. And the results of what I do, I think, should sing a lot louder than when I'm doing them. And as long as I'm making my deadlines, as long as I'm being productive and I'm contributing and I'm doing the job that I'm being paid to do, I think, that there can be a whole world of options and openness for me to execute those functions. So I would really hope that we can reimagine, what it means to be successful in a job and what the metrics are for establishing success. I think that would help.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we needed to do within my industry is identify the culture, our work culture. And when we really identified our work culture, we found that it was really very toxic and not really beneficial to anyone. So for us, it's about, one, the education, from people to really see this is how you really are, as opposed to what are our ideals as a union worker and what it means for worker voice. We found out that our practices are really very different from what we're saying. And I think even in American society, we see that too now, right? Where it's kind of in our face as to our ideology is very different from our behavior. So one was to identify that. and then educate people on it. And for us, for me, in a male-dominated occupation, you really have to be very gentle in how you educate people, so that they're not feeling like a bad guy, even if they are a bad guy. So that they're not feeling like one, so that they can see the hope and the ability to change and realize that we all have biases. If you're in this country, it's impossible not to have it. It's part of our culture, whether it's race, gender, whatever. It's impossible. That's how we function. And to just be aware of it, right, as you were saying. And then the next thing, I think, is the accountability behind it, right? Because we've talked about it, we're going to educate you on it, and now really being able to hold people to this new standard, I think, is very important. And I'm going to give one example. I had an apprentice who's missing a lot of days of work. And so the contractor was like, Leah, she's terrible. She's missed this many days. We can't stand for it. They had a scale of 1 to 5, and she got a 2 on attendance. I looked at her attendance. I'm like, you're absolutely right. It is horrible. I would have given her 2. Then I said, well, let me just look at the rest of the apprentices. I saw about 3 or 4 other apprentices, all males, who had worse attendance than hers, and their scores were 3s and 4s. So I went back to the contractor. I said, look, you're right. She's bad. But I did notice these guys. They're actually worse. What happened here? So, he was very embarrassed. He couldn't believe it. He had to check his own records. And I said to him, I even gave him an excuse. And it's not even really an excuse, it's really true. When there's one woman on the job, you notice everything she does. The guys, I would go, they would watch me every time I went to the bathroom, when I came back. When I went to lunch, when I came back. If there's one woman on the job, you can pay attention to everything she does. She can't blend anywhere. And so I just helped him to see that. And from that point on, his evaluations were really across the board very even. Because I didn't have a problem if it's a bad apprentice, but don't make the same level of bad worse for the woman. So, sometimes it's just really very practical things that people have to do. And because our industry can be very, not just toxic, but actually hostile and dangerous for women, I also said you have to, teach people how to find their allies inside and outside the organization, how to really practice organizing. Know who your people are inside that you can support you and have got your back, but it's almost just importantly to know those people on the outside who are going to shine a light on what's going on, or even the light could be the other way and saying, hey, you guys are trying, you're doing a really good job. So those are just little practical tips that I worked with. And then the last thing I'm going to say is support, and that's supportive services, of course, child care, of course, elder care, things that are drastically, automatically pushed to women in most cases, transportation. The support might be in just understanding there's differences. One of the things I did is we had a policy where you can only be out, you could take one leave, one medical leave. So during your 5-year apprenticeship, that also meant what, 1 pregnancy? If those are your years for pregnancy, which typically are, if they come in and yell, guess what? So if you got pregnant twice in your apprenticeship, you're kicked out the program. So I got rid of that, right? It's not for disability across the board, right? It's not the same. We didn't have maternity leave, so I put that in there. Of course, I didn't call it maternity leave. I called it paternity leave. So that, and then I saw my male apprentices really taking advantage, because there were several of them that really wanted to be home and spend time with their child and their partner, but the culture didn't allow it. So finding those allies among the men in the group who really support it, but don't even know how to really stand up, because they're getting beat down too.
One thing that came to mind when you were talking, Leah, is if you're one woman in a sea of men, you don't get the benefit of the doubt. And that is the one key thing about privilege, that the men got the benefit of the doubt, the women didn't. And it's something really important to remember. So that's a great example.
Yeah, I think it's that you're, whether you're a woman, you're a person of color, you stand out, right? If you are in the minority in your workplace, and so you're just going to be under the microscope nonstop, right? So I think those are all really important. I think the other piece of this, and you touched on this, Leah, is we really need to think about it as sort of equity as a health and safety issue, right? And it doesn't really matter the industry, but as I said, I do a lot of work with the building trades, teaching about sexual harassment, and we talk about it not as, we talk about it as a discrimination issue, but we talk about it more as like a health and safety issue. We want to create healthy workplaces, right? And we want them to be healthy for everybody who's in them, right? And what does that look like? And you do have to sort of use a fine hand, especially when you're educating a class of almost 70 men, at a time on sexual harassment. But it's really what is the language that we use to begin to talk about this. All right, so we have like about 15 minutes left. I want to make sure that we have any times for questions and questions for the group. So do we have any questions right now? Okay, you can just speak them and then I can repeat them. Is that the best way to do it? Okay. Yeah. Right here, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I do. My name is Daisy Chinlaw. I just spilled all the water. And I would say I walked in here and I thought it was going to be about being in male-dominated organizations as opposed to occupations, because I will share with you that every occupation is male-dominated. I come out of the beauty industry, and I was the first woman president for Avon in 100 years. I was the first woman president at Chanel. I was, so and I think the most important thing in a male-dominated culture is just understanding that it is male-dominated. And I grew up in a world where the best you can do is be a mediocre male, I mean, they taught you how men do things. This is how we do things. It wasn't called men. And I think the most effective way to do that is really through mentorship. HR, structure, all that stuff comes into play. But if you've got someone at the top who's going to say, hey, you know what, don't wear that, or don't dress like that, or don't do that, because there's an inner kind of code that they have, and we can't read it. We don't know it. And one of my male mentors said to me, you girls won in school. You were the smartest, and you raised your hand, and you did it all, and now it's our turn. It's our turn. We got the rules. And I'm sure it's changed a bit, but I think... So I'd say the male-dominated occupations, women need to look at the most highly paid occupations and why are men running it.
Why don't we take a few questions and then we'll have some responses. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your experiences. It's so relatable to see that it takes time, it takes patience, and it's something that you build through years of being beaten up and just saying, yeah, I can do it. You have to be very, very stubborn, I think. And I also believe that this is about leadership is male-dominated. It's not occupations. But we also have to face challenges of other female debating what you do and why you are so pushy or why you want to go to the highest positions. So what would you advise or when you listen someone saying it's like women are terrible bosses. So how do you tackle those type of conversations and situations?
I think there was one more hand up. Yeah, why don't we take one more question and then we'll turn it over to the panelists.
Hi, my name is Kate Maselli. I work at the U.S. Department of Labor Women's Bureau, one of Leah's former colleagues. I wanted to ask if you all have any policies and procedures related to gender-based violence and harassment at work, because we know that's a huge issue, not only for recruitment, but for retention of women, not just in male-dominated occupations, but often in male-dominated occupations. So I wanted to ask if you all have any policies and procedures about that.
Sure. I mean, I could start just in terms of hear your point loud and clear. I think on the point about women, there's an interesting thing that when you have a scarcity mindset where you feel that there's only very few opportunities for women to be in leadership, your other women become a threat versus a support. And again, that word intention, we have to have our minds be changed that it is my intention to lift up other women and set that tone. And for me as a leader in my organization, that is because that act will reverberate and that act will like make waves. Do you know what I mean? So I think part of it is just deciding that we're not in a scarcity mindset. There is, we're a leaderful organization, and women need to lift each other up. That needs to be our instinct, not the other, and not to, when you've got scarcity as your mindset, other women are a threat. We've got to change that. So I hear you. It's a real thing and something we have to change. I will tell you on the policy front, absolutely. We absolutely have the policies. I will say what's written on a piece of paper is one thing. How you live that piece of paper is a whole other story. Are you consistent with it? Is it a value that is shared? Do you have metrics, to your point about metrics, do you have metrics that really show that you're living and enacting it? So it has to be real. And I think that my feeling about it is I think we've got all the right pieces of paper. It's up to the leaders in the organization to set the right tone and to live it and to make sure it gets lived consistently.
Yeah, I agree that it's male dominated at the top for sure, and my mentor Vera Rubin was a large advocate for women in astronomy, and she would show statistics about women in graduate school being close to 50-50, and then even in the postdoctoral time frame, it was there was a small drop, but it was 40-60. But then to get to that tenure track professor, that's when the numbers just absolutely plummeted to nothing. And it's hard to not look at that, and at the universities who are doing the hiring and looking at the hiring panels of just nothing but white men, and at the same time, that's usually a time in your life when, as a woman, you're starting a family. And so, these metrics when it comes to, my application versus my, male counterpart's application, where I might not have as many publications because I had 2 babies, I get 10 points, that again, I think a broadened understanding of metrics for how a woman or how any person, anybody, is regarded as a suitable, person for a job. That really is an area I think we can improve. And the sexual harassment and policy, the National Science Foundation is really trying very diligently and hard over the last long time to put policies in place to address cases of sexual harassment at universities where the entire university is held accountable, and some funding, government funding has been pulled and no longer provided to certain institutions that have been found guilty of such things. So can we do better? Yes. And I really hope that we can live in a world where, these things become, so unheard of that we don't have to have all of these policies and review process and all of those things. But I think we have a long way to go.
I was going to say, one of the fabulous things about working at the Women's Bureau is that I could use terminology like gender-based violence. And there was a cheerleading squad behind me. But my reality in the trades is that would stop the conversation before I can even get it started. So we do talk about things that are bullying, hazing, and harassment, which is going to cover everyone. Of course, when we start looking at the cases, it's going to be more effect on women. Another thing that we did at New Non-Traditional Employment for Women, we have what we call signature projects. And so now we're putting part of our signature projects is that it's a site free of bullying, haze, and harassment. We make it part of the toolbox talks. That's part of the culture. That's part of the services we offer for the project managers, the owners, the foremans to all be trained in this. And so we have a way of saying it without saying gender, because it just would freeze people like, oh, what's happening? Are we going to get a lawsuit? They would probably lose their mind. But yes, we are doing the gender-based violence. We're just not using the word gender. So that's one thing. And in terms of we have been intentionally been made to feel that there can only be one of us. And so we have to intentionally use the language and the common sense that shows it can be more of us. I always talk about what is the population. If we got 50% or 50, whatever the population is, I'm cool with us having that part of it, right? And sometimes it's very difficult. I'm looking at my trade sister over here, Tina. She knows that, if I can't tell you how many people, if the record was true, how many people I would have had to sleep with for each promotion that I get to. It has never been attributed to my job, right? And they can't even keep me with one gender, because it's whoever I'm friendly with, it's who I'm sleeping with, and how I got to either I slept with them or I sued. And so it is an intentional mindset to really keep women down and to not progress and to be afraid. And so it's just as intentional. And someone mentioned stubbornness. I got a good degree of that, fortunately, to help us to remove that and kind of unveil it and show people really what's behind it.
So I think we just have a few minutes left. So one of the things we wanted to sort of end the day on is kind of a final call to action for each attendee. Kind of what is an actionable takeaway from today's session that you might have in mind for those who are attending as well, for folks at this conference. What kind of action do you think we can take? And I'm going to take the privilege as the moderator to put out one action there, which is, and I think each of you mentioned this, the importance of external support and external sort of networks. I think that I've seen this to be a really important asset. It's important to have some kind of support within your organization, but equally important to have support outside of your organization, because those are often the people that you can turn to and have honest conversations and not worry about the blowback or the gossip. But in order to build those external networks, funding is required, resources are required. You cannot do that without proper funding and resources to make those kinds of programming happen, and to rely on the organizations that are kind of part of the problem to fund it is not effective. So that's one of the areas that I've seen to be most helpful in the work that I've done with women who are in unions. So what do each of you want to kind of leave the audience with in terms of an actionable takeaway today? Neena, you want to start? Or Leah? You go.
Yeah, you see I'm like anxious for you, right?
Yeah, you go.
So I'm going to say if you can get your organization to really define what success looks like. So for oftentimes in the trades, you have to be able to read a map, unfold a box, and close it back. You have to have X amount of math with trig. And when you look at it, what you're actually doing and the people who are successful don't need any of those things. So there are intentional barriers stopping women and girls from even coming to it. So I would say if you can make your organization define the physical, the actual things that make someone good, and then now try to make that even or match what the requirements are for people to come in. Because there's barriers for people to even to get to the door that usually have a disproportionate effect on women and people of color.
Sarah?
I love that because I was going to say, think of, what are the metrics, what are the tangible things in your field, in your area that really are the pushing edge or pushing your field forward in terms of its growth, in terms of, you know, for me, it's new discoveries, you know, and identifying how how one can achieve those things in, you know, an outside of the box world where we could really imagine, you know, doing a job, you know, for a fair and equitable wage, and being able to also, you know, have a life outside of the office. And if we can take some of the lessons learned from a horrible, awful time in our lives, which was the pandemic, where I think not enough of the successes are being sung about, you know, the permanent work from home for 2 years, or, you know, that I really think we can reimagine a 9-to-5 work life balance that really addresses the needs of all the things that we talked about today, the care, whether it be child care or, you know, elderly care, the stress and the extra burdens that women always seem to be levied upon. How do we support each other, you know, instead of putting each other down? You know, define the metrics that mean success, and then, you know, let people have the freedom to go and achieve that success in a way that works for their lives.
I would say find the barriers that we're creating, break those completely. Don't let self-doubt get in the way, because I think women feel like we have to be perfect at everything and not take risk. And it's okay to take some risk and not do great. It's really about learning and then trying again and learning and trying again in the effort to break those barriers. And I guess the last thing I'd say is no action is too small to show solidarity and lifting each other up. So don't ever doubt that one connection that you make will actually make a huge difference.
May I just, I think you've given me an inspiration. I'm on the board for IWPR, and you talk about metrics, and I think they're probably, sorry, let me see. They're probably something here in terms of a project that we can benchmark. What are the best companies, or what are the best metrics that women should be looking for? Because it exists. We have to shine a spotlight on where it exists and how it's possible. Because when you say imagine, and most men can't even imagine it. So if they can imagine where it's been done, how it's been done, and how a culture has changed, it could be a project for us. Do we have any funders in the room who wants to fund this? Anyway, would anybody be interested in something like that? A study that shows here are the metrics, here are the areas, and then we publish these companies that have done well for women, and they can go work there.
It's a great way to wrap up. Thank you so much to everybody who attended. Thank you so much to our 3 panelists. I really appreciate you sharing everything today, and enjoy the rest of your conference. Round of applause.
Yeah, thank you.